how you see is what you see. Richard Rohr said that. He is a Franciscan priest and, in my opinion, a priest for our times. He's a lovely gentleman I love learning from. And I will probably quote him again and again as I do this series. There are a few people that I will quote again and again, and he's one of them. How you see is what you see. And Father Rohr also says that if you learn to see first, if you learn your skill of seeing first, then everything else follows. And Father Rohr talks about seeing in a lot of different ways. He talks about seeing the world as all sacred. Not some things sacred and some things profane. He talks about seeing the world whole instead of divided up. And those things make sense to me as well. However, I think the first time I got an inkling of, well, let me back up and say, to go on learning to see first. What you see is the world you live in. And when we say see, we're talking about a worldview, a paradigm, the beliefs you have that describe what the world is. And the reason that is critical, and we all have one, we all have that way of seeing. It's just, is your way of seeing helping you? Is it blessing you or cursing you? And if you have a worldview that includes curses, then that's one thing. But if you have a worldview of only blessing, like I do, then everything's a blessing, everything's a medicine. So right there, we may not even be living in the same world. So it's like what you see is the world you're living in. And you have to make decisions and choices about that. It doesn't happen by accident because, well, it does happen by accident as far as we all, get some kind of worldview transmitted to us from our parents and our culture and media. But if you grow up and think this isn't working for me, I'm miserable with this kind of saying, then yes, you have to start making decisions and planting things deliberately. And there's a little bit of a hump over like moving from what was familiar to something new. But after you get used to it, you're like, I'm not going to go back. Like, why would I go back to seeing the world as a scary place? Why would I do that? Why would I go back to the world where I have to make enemies? Why would I do that? It's like, I'm so over it, right? And so it's not as hard like that after the first little practice of it. So that's why seeing is so important. It's so important because everything else follows, because whatever world you're living in is the world you're responding to. And if you move to a different world based on seeing differently, then you can have a whole new set of responses. What used to be something condemnation or something sin is now a wound or something that can be healed. It's a completely different proposition, a completely different world. And even in the New Testament talks about seeing the pure in heart shall see God. It means that everywhere they look, they'll see God because they're pure in heart. But basically, that pure in heartness is a decision about what you see. Anyway, there's lots of places in the Bible, but that's the clearest one, I think, if you need the Bible. I love the Bible. It's cool. But going back to where I learned to choose to see, I think the first time I heard of this was the quote, I ran across the quote from Marianne Williamson that said, everything in this world is either love or a call for love. And when I read that, I felt like, yeah. And I also started to realize that miracles are not anomalies, and they're not one-time events, that I could choose to see each point of life as the miracle that it is. And the sacredness that Father Rohr talks about, and I also understand that the world is a temple, a sacred temple, and that covers everything. And I don't see things as Satan or the devil. I see them as a crucified God, which is completely different. I haven't really discussed Satan or the devil here, and you probably will never hear me talk about that, because they're not really in my world, or it's a completely different kind of, sometimes I say that we'll talk about it in a loose term, and I actually like thinking about it because it's such a strong paradigm in our world that has developed over thousands of years that I engage with it quite often, and I may have a video just about that. But for me, it's not about temptation. I don't see the world as a world of temptation. It's a world of that we're hurt. We're all hurt, and we're operating from these hurts. And I also don't see a world that is anybody else's problem but mine. Like, I'm 100% responsible for my response. I'm 100% responsible for the kind of life I lead. It's not up to someone else to change. It's up to me to change. And it doesn't mean that it's my fault for everything, or that I can control everything, because control and fault are not good pieces of my paradigm. I don't put those in my paradigm. You see where I'm going with this? And I think that, you know, in this series, I'm just riffing. Like, I'm just picking a quote and then riffing off of it, some ideas that I have. So I'm not being very methodical, like here. But I think, you know, you're smart enough. I think that, you know, if you hear some of these things, you can study them. You can study the people that have certain kinds of ideas and why they have them, what choices there are out there, and you can literally choose. If you don't like it, if you don't think it's true, that's one thing. But to just say, oh, I can't do that, no, you can do it. Making some different choices about how you're seeing will automatically move you to a new world, and you'll be in my world. And I'm not the only one. There's other people who think like I do. Father Rohr, Marianne Williamson, Matt Kahn is another one. He says it's all God. And maybe some other people say that too, and I say that too now. It's all God. And so if it's all God, your approach is completely different. And if you don't like it's all God part, then maybe think about the whole world as children of God, the people in it as children of God. And most of us have lip service to that, but we don't actually approach the world that way. So if your worldview technically involves thinking of everybody as children of God, do you really? So again, what you see, or how you see, is what you see, and these are decisions that you make, and you can make new decisions and practice them, and the anxiety leaves you already. Because if you're already living in the world where you're held by God, and He's before you and behind you and on either side of you, which is also in the Bible, if He's your pillar of fire by night and your pillar of cloud by day, then there's no fear. I mean, you may have moments of fear, but it's just the anxiety leaves. And this is the kind of sight that I think a person needs to have if they contemplate doing larger work in the world toward peace, which is what this channel's about. That you have to start by seeing that there's nobody, for me, I don't see anybody that's outside of this. Peace is not an against anyone. It's like you can come in as soon as you're ready. This is what peace is. This is how we do it. And you're invited. And it doesn't matter where you've been, how hard and dark it was before. And maybe, we all need a little help, maybe letting go some of our things, because my letting go journey has been very long and is still going on. because every level that I let go that used to be me, the angry me, the weak me, and there's still lots of weakness, and I don't have a lot of surface anger, but sometimes I find pockets of deeper anger and resentment. And it's okay to be angry. I mean, if there's times to be angry, and I'm not saying don't feel an emotion, but I don't want to live like that on a constant basis. I don't want to have my energy be drained from that, because I know that the peace that I can have and that I can invite others to is a choice that I can make. It's not an instant choice necessarily. There's maybe some little work. I don't want to say, hey, just get a different attitude, because that's not helpful either. These kinds of things do take a little bit of work. And there's layers, like whatever layers all the problems I thought I had or that I knew I had, maybe I've solved those. But now I'm getting down to the ones I'm like, I didn't know that was a problem, but I guess it is, and I need to keep going, you know. And so it's an ongoing process. But it starts with how you see things, how you name things, how you describe things, what categories you have that you allow. Because there's certain kinds of categories, like I don't allow the category of enemy. I would never use that category. If someone has made me their enemy, that sounds like a personal problem, okay? But I don't need to do that. That just doesn't even make sense to me. Why would I do that? Or things like, this is one I made up, a problem is just a blessing that hasn't happened yet. So if you have problems, that means that's the area where your blessing is going to come at. So whatever your problems or downfalls or weaknesses or lacks are, that's where the abundance is going to be coming through. That's where the calling is going to be coming through. So don't be afraid to tinker with your sight of the world and get yourself where you want to be seeing, what kind of world you want to be seeing. And then you'll realize you have a whole nother set of options for how you respond. And I invite you to do that in terms of how you see the world out there. Like if you're absorbing the paradigm that comes from mainstream news channels or something like that, not recommended by me. If you're labeling groups and people out there, what they will or will not do to you, but you've never actually even met one or whatever, you know what I mean? There's some very basics on site that you need to tend to if you want to participate in the world of peace that's already happening with many of us, and you're invited. So I'll see you soon next time.